Good morning, Mike.
Good morning, Dave.
It's always good to see you. Where are you at today?
We are up in the Adirondack Mountains, upstate New York. Gigantic park. But today we're going to talk about light air sailing and on lakes. So a lot of lakes up here.
Yeah, you're in the lake country again. So we're going to pick up from where we did our last discussion. We're talking about windy and weird, but as most places, at some point in time during regatta, it's going to get light and weird, right? Always going to follow it. Similar experience we talked about last week that we had in Lake George, that it was windy the first couple of days, and I will distinctly remember the last day where it did get very light and weird, and we threw away a perfectly good race by kind of through our ocean sailing mentality, sailing the middle. So before that ever happens again, I'm coming back to you for some advice on what to do when it gets light and weird on the lakes. So let's get to
Well,
it.
last week we talked about the heavier and weird, and the thing about heavier and weird is you're always moving. You can still get somewhere. So a lot of times you can play the odds and can go up the middle because the shifts are where are so important. But that changes pretty radically when it gets light and weird. You got to have a very different mentality when it's light and weird.
What is your version of light and weird?
My version of light and weird is really when you go really down speed, where there's some holes in there where you can go really slow. Um, we talked a few weeks ago about the difference between lighter and heavier for shifts versus puff. And what we talked about there is when it gets very light, there's kind of no amount of shift that's going to make up for even just a little bit of pressure. So it's all about pressure, pressure, pressure.
And on the lakes, though, the pressure sometimes comes from everywhere. So,
Yeah.
what is the best way to? I guess it's sort of a two-part. Kind of study the venue that you're going, and maybe anticipation that one day is going to be light. But then also studying it the day of the race, or having a handle on it before you leave the dock.
There's various levels of preparedness I want to do. And I would say that, very light and weird is sort of that condition where I don't feel like studying the wind really does me much good. I think it almost gives you some bad. You see something happen and you think it's going to happen again, and it doesn't. It happens something different next time. Whereas I think when it's windier, you can kind of look at the nature of the puffs. Do they come and they spread out? Are they lines? I almost think it's a detriment to spend too much time looking up wind, and I don't want to get an hour early in light air, drift around and figure that out. So yeah, I don't study the wind a lot. I wait to see. I sail with what I got right now.
So when you in your pre-start warm-ups, do you sail to the edges, or I mean, are you still taking compass bearings and figuring out average, or do you really just go, okay, well, screw it, let's just start the
No,
race?
I don't use the compass at all in that stuff. I really don't sail the edges. And part of the problem is if you kind of sail the edge, if it's that light, you get in a hole, they start the sequence, you're not even going to get back.
Mm.
I really think that it's not going to help you much to study too much. I love to study the wind, but this is not the time for it. This is the time to just stand up in your boat, look at the edges, look at flags on shore, look at smokestacks, look at anything that's going to tell you anything about what might be coming. But that's all you can do.
Would you, in some of these, particularly like the high mountain lakes, would you go advance as much as to maybe look at some of the topography maps of the mountains and find out where the saddles are based on, okay, it's going to be the northerly saddle over there, would you look at it at least at that level?
I think that's really useful when the wind is a little steadier or a little windier, where it's actually kind of flowing and maybe channel through the mountains or around a mountain or over a hill. I really think that there's much less of that when it's really, really light. It's just kind of like I said, either there's wind or there isn't. And really the bottom line is you're trying to find the most pressure and sail to it and commit. And you kind of have to go all the way and commit. And I don't know, maybe there's some little things that you could come up with, like there's a gentle breeze and there's a big low spot or something, then maybe that's useful. But I think for the most part, I do the least amount of homework when it's really light.
Okay. So when you're let's talk about the start then. I mean, at some point when you're getting into the the pre-start the 5 minute countdown? There must be at some point where you just gotta lock in a one side or the other. What's your approach to typically dealing with this kind of like weird lake stuff?
Yeah. So last week's podcast here was that we talked about like I kind of start near the middle of the line because I know I'm going to get some more breeze. I'm likely to get a shift. So I don't want to leverage one side too much or the other. I do the absolute opposite in light air. I'll hang out as long as I dare, kind of toward the middle of the line, kind of hedging my bet to where I think the side of the course that I think the wind's going to fill in on. And I make that call by just looking upwind where I see the most pressure. And I will commit hard to that side, and with that, pretty hard to that side of the line. If I think the right's favored, I'll start near the boat, try to tack pretty quickly, head that way, get going the direction I think the wind is right away.
All right. And then once you're up the beat, presuming you've had your typical good start, you go in the direction you want. Some time ago, you wrote a great piece about this sort of 20% point. Is there a point at which you check in and stick with your plan or bail?
I do think so. If you don't mind here, I'm going to kind of do a little whiteboard thing on this. So yeah, what you're referring to is that critical decision points, right? And if the mark's all the way up here, right, and you've started and you're working, here's the starting line down here, and you're kind of working up the beat. So I'll make this a red line that we're working up the beat. Suppose you wanted to go right. I saw pressure over there. There's this magical time. We called it critical decision points. If I go all the way to the edge, this is 50% up the beat, you're already in a corner, right? So I think there's a magical moment where I reassess. So if before the start, let's just undo this. If before the start, I started going right, because I saw pressure over here, about 20% up the beat, I think, is like the perfect time to reassess. I sail real hard, focus completely on speed and getting to the right. But here I stand up in the boat and I say, am I right or not? Is this really developing the way I thought I did? Because this is kind of my last chance to cross all the way to the other side and at least pick up some pieces if I'm wrong and the other side's filling in. What I'm trying not to do is, though, sail up the middle. This is different than sailing up the middle. I'm trying to commit to go right, and if I'm wrong, I'm committing to go left.
How do you usually know when you're wrong?
That's a good question. I think there's two ways. It's not happening like you thought. So it's a great question, though. And that's probably the genius of this 20% thing is it's enough time for things to start to develop. So suppose the other side of the course here, suppose other people went this way and they're looking really good, like they're really extending, and you stand up and you see, hey, maybe there's some more pressure over there that I didn't see earlier. But I find that these boats are as indicators, they're already going to be ahead of you at this point, or you're already going to be ahead of them. So if I stand up and I see that I'm here and I'm here, let's see, if I'm all the way over here, they're doing pretty well over there. If instead I'm all the way over here and they're back here, I'm doing well. Like it really does play out in light wind. If the pressure really is more on your side, you're going so much faster in light air with a little bit of extra breeze that you gain a ton quickly. So I stand up here, I look at two things. Does it look like I thought it would look? So I look before the race at whatever indicators I could find. And if that's all collapsed and it's different, and I look on the other side, I see breeze, that's when I switch sides. Or if the fleet is telling me that the left is working.
Well, that's a moment though, where this is the genius of great sailors like yourself, though, to be able to go, not get so headstrong into, well, the plan was to go right. The advantage will come eventually, but the ability to just change plans.
Right. And if you're correct, if you tacked right away and your side is correct, you're going to be in the top little group, right? You're going to be way ahead of everybody else. And that's the nature of light wind. It really accordions out. If you're wrong and you have to go bail at 20%, there's going to be boats way ahead of you if the left is working and you pick the right. And you got to say, well, that's still better than digging my grave in the right corner and really dying out here. And if I pick it up at 20%, I'm still in touch with them. Yeah, I'm not going to win this race, but I'm going to save it. It's not going to be a disaster either.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, that said, we'll go backwards for a second. We'll talk about puffs, because I know when it's breezy, it's easy to see them, or there's more of them, or what it might be. And I feel like in this light stuff, you kind of get these veins of wind that's come and go, towards the middle and go away, whatever it is. So, like, are the puffs any different when it's light in their terms of their behavior and how you connect them than you would when it's windy?
Yeah, I mean, that is the part where you asked about homework before. I kind of look at the nature of the wind. I do look a little bit of how it's going. Sometimes, I think often in light air, it's kind of one side has a little bit more pressure than the other. And you can see it with a boat moving in the distance. You can see, hopefully you see little ripples on the water. And a lot of times you really can't see that. And that's why that 20% thing, looking at the fleet, really matters. But, occasionally it looks a little different than that. Occasionally there are you can sort of connect some puffs. There might be a puff on the early right, and then you see one here, but I always find whenever I try to do that and be conservative and go connect one puff to the other, one side or the other still wins. So I'm really trying to maybe bide my time with this. I see a puff, I'll head to that, then I'll decide which side to go to. I'll use that puff to say, you're going to have to commit to an edge. So I'm always trying to commit early and be right. And if I'm wrong, a bail, but then reassess and get to an edge. And, whenever I try to be conservative and lead like the fleet back, like that side one, I better lead them back. That's when I lose the most. Kind of like the worst of both worlds then.
Talk about boat speed a little bit. Is boat speed more important in light air or less?
But, I often hear that boat speed doesn't matter in light air, right? Like it doesn't have anything to do with anything. And it's but I think that's wrong. Like I think for the most part, yeah, if you get to that puff first in that first group, you're going to be in great shape. But a lot of times I feel like a little bit of boat speed kind of gets you in front of your group. And then when you do see change or something, you can actually take advantage of it. You're not stuck and pinned in. So I think boat speed matters, perhaps not as much as it does in medium or heavier air, but steadier, certainly not as much as steady breeze, but it still matters. You still really focus on it. So I think in light air, when you really you have a lot of time, you make a commitment to a side and you go fast and try to head that way for a long time and then reassess and then put your head back down and go again.
Okay, let's go back to the whiteboard here for a second before you go away. Talked about the 20% down the bottom of the course. What about in the top quarter? There's that sort of, as boats are coming back together, what are kind of the safe leg tips in terms of like, clear air, traffic management, shifts, puffs? I mean, when you're getting to the top, what takes priority?
Well, so it's really easy to, the rules of thumb when in steadier breeze is, want to keep your air clear. And, you'd think you want to hear too, but like if you're heading to pressure and you're in a little dirty air, you still got to stick in that dirty air unless there's a really clean way out and right back again right away. Think about it in terms of how many boat lanes you gain because you're in pressure. And it might be 30 or something like that, 20 or 30. Whereas you're going to lose just a boat length or two being in dirty air. So, unless there's all things are equal, I still suck it up and go through some dirty air. But there was a lot of questions built in that last question. So as you're getting to the top, like I may have committed to a side, and if this side has the most wind, you and whoever you're with are going this way. The fleet spreads out in lighter air. I'm a little less worried about that gigantic clump at the weather mark. I just prioritize going the right way first. And often by the time I'm coming in, this top part of the mark, either I've gone all the way or maybe I've failed at 20%, but I'm often at the edge anyway. I don't really have many options. That said, I do, if I find myself kind of in the middle here, I'm still looking to see which edge I think is going to win at the end. A lot of times, like, it's worth even overstanding to get into that breeze and come back. So I don't mind, like, hey, it's really crowded over there, but there's more wind. I'm still going to go find a way to get over there. Doing everything to stay in the wind.
Yeah. So I suppose that sort of validates the point, right? If there was that sort of imagine a little more pressure in the upper right corner.
Yep.
Instead of leading a group back on the starboard ley line, which would be more of a tactical thing, you're going for a breeze, which is more of a boat speed thing. Just
right. Like if all these boats are here on this ley line, there's a whole pile of them, right? And there's more pressure over here, and you find yourself coming in on port here. Maybe you're here. Like in more breeze, I might be very tempted to lead them back, to keep my air clear. Not so in this stuff. In this light stuff, I will take sterns, bob and weave, overstand whatever I got to do to be in this pressure. Thinking this is going to gain me many boat lengths. Anything I lose here is just a few. It's hard to do. I'm not particularly wired for this, right? Like I have to really think about it and say, no, I'm going to go all the way and overstand. It doesn't feel conservative to me.
Nobody's wired to take sterns. It never feels right.
Never feels right. But I think this is when you got to do it. Doesn't feel good to stay in bad air either.
All right. Take us downwind then, now that we've got the whiteboard here. What works downwind on light stuff?
Yeah. So, somewhere back to that critical decision points, it's, sort of down here at 20%, we're reassessing our strategy. Were we correct? Well, this very similar thing happens upwind. So I'm sorry, near the weather mark. So right before I kind of get to the weather mark, right before I have to do the rounding, I'm, we always call it the 80% critical decision point. I am deciding what my first move out of the mark. And once again, it's 100% based on pressure. So if we round in this little righty, first thing I'm going to do is jibe and go into this pressure. Maybe I round in the righty, but it's kind of fleeting and I see pressure now building on the left shore. And I look way ahead, and then I'll do a straight set and try to meet up with that. Go this way. But I'm making that decision upwind when I'm about here, when I still have time to think about it. Right before the mess of the mark, I'll stand up and I'll say, and a lot of times you really know it. You're coming in pressure on the right, you got to jibe. Coming in pressure on the left, you got to straight set.
Okay. We're presuming, in this sort of light, we're in the super light or light. Let's go back to our beloved J24 class, where you're sailing more angles, right?
Yep.
Is it then, do you find it better to just send it high angle to a side? And is the middle tend to be deadly on a lake? Yeah.
So, there's sort of like, a lot of boats and ASIM boats too will sail pretty big angles downwind. And it's a little bit like upwind. You're sort of looking way ahead and trying to see what's happening. And so you might, the more angles that the boat sail, the bigger the angles. Like if you're in a, Melges 15 or something, and you're going to be reaching off, you may really look to the corners. And then if you're in a boat that, that you sort of have to go downwind anyway, that might be out of play. So it just all the angle does is tell you what's in play and what isn't. But either way, you're still lining up pressure. So like in this case, even though this puff is way over here, if this one's not here, say, if that's your next puff, even though even though that's your next puff is way over here, you got to go for it, right? And maybe there's a small one here. It's really small, but if you or in a boat that goes deeper, you may have to jibe instead, because, suppose these guys might jibe instead because they're going much lower. They're never going to get to this puff. So all the angles do to me is say what's in play for pressure. But if I'm this blue boat here, I might even go extra high to get to the puff and take it down. I am willing to sail out of my way, sail extra distance to stay in pressure. Contrast that to the heavier wind where I'm doing everything I can to just make distance to the mark, because I want to sail less distance. I'm not going to go that much faster in a puff, so I might as well go less distance. Very different thought pattern.
And how do you, when you get out to the edges and you're in that wind lane, okay, fine, we're over here, there's breeze on one side of the lake. It doesn't look that good to go back to the middle. At some point you got to point back at the mark. How do you deal with that decision?
Well, I think that's the same upwind and downwind, right? Like, do you sail into this more or do you take it back? You're trying to figure out what the most pressure is. A lot of times you can only see one pressure ahead. So you sail to the pressure. All right, we're kind of here now. Now what do we do? Can we take this pressure somewhere? Or is the next thing developing that we can take it to or not? And that's always the question. And, often you're kind of going downwind with the pressure. You're probably not going to get a couple different pressure lines. Probably going to take one down. There's going to be one side that fills in, and that's that. And that side's going to be way ahead of the other side.
Okay, then last thing for the whiteboard, can you sketch me Mike Ingham when he's on the wrong side of the course? I want a head caricature sketch. So what does Mike look like?
All right. So so I'm going upwind here, right? Let's go back to that 20% thing, right? I think I'm pretty calm. I think it's sort of like, well, I did the best I could.
I'm going to check your cartooning skills here. You got 30 seconds to draw you.
Yeah. So, well, I think part of it is I literally stand up in the boat here. Even if it's a really small single-handed boat, I'll stand up in my boat. So my caricature is, I my head and I really look hard both directions. Like I'll look this way long enough to see, like, if I can see more than just what's going on. I might look beyond it. What are the cruising boats doing on the shore and et cetera? And then I'll do the same the other way. And then I may sit down and go fast for a little while and think about it and then get up again. And then, I don't know, I think what you're really looking for is, oh no.
Oh no.
Like my,
one eye closed. There you go. That's the rum.
Yeah, right. So,
all right. Okay. So let's make the whiteboard go away. I guess we're done drawing. And let's take us through your conclusions, the true thoughts on this light air lake sailing, which, applies to open water sailing as well, but it's sort of focused on the lakes, light air, weird lake stuff.
Yeah, really, we say lake, but if it's light air filling in on the ocean too, it's typically one side is going to fill in with something, as something, just gradient or sea breeze comes or something. There might be other factors in open water like current, which you're not going to have in lakes, but it's still the same idea that pressure for the most part just takes over for everything. And I'm so focused on pressure, and that just really changes how you do it. And you kind of see a trend coming with the pressure. It usually continues. If you're going right and you see a little more pressure, you have to sail into it hard. You have to commit. And that's the mental mindset that's very different for me than when it's either open water steady or even lake sailing and shifty puffy. If it's windy enough and you can keep moving, you can connect them. There's just massive gains made because you go so much faster with just a little extra pressure when it's light and weird. That's the bottom line.
All right, excellent. Well, I think it might be, I guess, the nod to, I believe it was Dave Devenbaugh, right, who coined the phrase "learn to love light air," right? So you just gotta learn to love it and just sailing it, figure it out, get used to it all the time, right?
I think part of loving it is sort of like I like it a lot more than I used to, by sort of realizing, yeah, you asked what does my expression look like when I get it wrong? And, I think I expect to get it wrong a certain percent of the time. I'm hoping to get it right more than not. But, I'm going to go one way, and then all of a sudden something that I don't know how I ever could have seen starts to look good on the other side. And everybody I know, that there's some people I know that do really well in light air and this weird lake stuff. And I realize that they don't always do well. Like, they always look like they're doing well because you see them skying across on you. But the reason you see that is they commit. So when they commit and they get it right, they win. So they win more than their fair share because they are pretty good at it, pretty good at seeing the win, but they also lose big when they lose. And I think that's just the nature of that light weird stuff. Is you have to commit. So as soon as you have to commit, when you're wrong, if you don't catch it soon enough with that 20%, if it happens later in the leg, it's just too late and you're just going to have a bad race. That's all there is to it. So you got to say, oh, I'll get it next time.
There you go. There's the Mike expression link for you. All right. That's Zach.
That's what you're looking for. Yeah.
All right. Thanks again for your wisdom, Mike. We'll see you soon. Enjoy your time.
All right. Thanks, Dave. Bye-bye.